Hi, and welcome to a new episode of Kodsnack. This week is going to be a bit special, as you might assume, since I'm talking English. And usually when we talk English, we have a guest. But before we introduce our guest this week, I'm going to say hi to my panel, and it's Amanda and Fredrik. Welcome. Yeah, so everyone just have to, excuse our English, I guess.
Obviously.
Yeah. So this is the first time I think we do a show in English, the three of us, right?
Yeah, I think so. It's exotic.
It's my first, so.
Yeah, exactly. So with us today, the reason we are speaking English is that we have a very exciting guest, I would say. Myself, I've been looking forward to this. If you've been listening to the show a couple of times, you know that we have been discussing like this psychological phenomenon that is called imposter syndrome. So what we've been talking about is like the feeling of you're never enough or you don't fit into and you always feel like a fake. So we thought it would be good to bring on someone that can actually explain the psychology of that. So I'm happy to introduce to you guys Wendi Dunford. Welcome to the show, Wendi.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
And you're a real psychologist, right?
I am. I also can speak Swedish, but I don't think it would go very well for everyone. So thank you for switching for me.
Right. You're an American, but you live in Sweden, right?
Yeah.
So,
Tjena.
Tjena.
Okay.
That's the extent of
Sweden.
No, we also thought it would be good to do this show in English because I think it could be interesting for people outside of Sweden to kind of hear this from the perspective of developers, like or our little what do you say, like what we work with, because I feel like this from what we have seen from our listener and the feedback we got is that there's a lot of people that feel this way that are working with just development, and I don't know if it's something that is widespread and it's just that we're living in our own little corner and think that everything revolves around us. But maybe we should start from the beginning. We have been talking about the feeling that you don't belong, right? Or that you're feeling like you can't measure up to everyone else. And it feels like everyone going around feeling the same thing. And what we've kind of thought this is what is called an imposter syndrome. But maybe you should start there, Wendi. Would you describe that as the imposter syndrome? And in that case, what's kind of the clinical description of that?
Okay. So a good sort of working definition is an inability to internalize your accomplishments. And then which feels like the most important part is, I say secondarily, is the persistent fear of being exposed as a fraud or people are going to find out. So you've accomplished something, because we're not talking about people who have accomplished nothing and are thinking everyone's going to look at them like, wow, you've accomplished nothing. That's a whole different set of things.
Right.
This is people who are accomplishing things, doing some pretty cool stuff, and they're unable to internalize that success in a way that sort of makes them feel good. They've accomplished something, kind of a job well done feeling. And it's more of I just got lucky, or wow, everyone else did their part so that I could do mine. And it's sort of having a hard time absorbing that, all the good stuff that they did, the hard work that they did do. And then they're left with this feeling of, well, thank you for the compliment, but if you really knew who I was or how...
It was just luck. Or
it was just luck, yeah.
excuses.
Yeah, if you knew I was so incapable, you would not be saying these things. And there's sort of a underlying feeling of someone's going to find out that I have been faking this. And that it's incredibly uncomfortable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Incredibly uncomfortable.
Yeah, and stressful, right? Because it's not only that it kind of gives you that unease, but it also feels like you're constantly like thinking about that and stressing about someone finding out or whatever, or exposing you, or right.
Right.
So do you think this is something that is very typical to specific sets of work, or is this something that is all over the place and we just don't talk about it that much?
So a couple things here. First of all, there's some numbers on this, and most studies are American, and we have our own bag of problems. So I don't know how it translates everywhere, but 70% of people who have been studied around this topic have imposter syndrome or experienced it at some point.
Wow.
So you are not alone. Yeah. And part of it is, and I'll talk a little bit about it developmentally, maybe more, but let me just say this. There's this part of life that it should feel normal to have accomplished something maybe a little early and feel this feeling. So imagine it's sort of like a normal response. Say you're 16 and you win a competition you probably didn't prepare for, and suddenly you're like, oops, I just won. And you didn't really try very hard or, work for it. That natural feeling of like, oops, I don't want anyone to know that I really made that up. That feeling is okay at some point in your developmental spectrum. The problem is folks sort of stay in it through a lifespan. And we can talk about why that happens in a minute. But so 70% of people will experience this or have chronic problems with it. Also, it's going to vary in different fields. So in my own field, there's definitely that feeling that can occur when you write a book, or, you have a successful practice, or, you sort of teach and different things. But for the most part, there aren't people watching me do my work. I'm not constantly being observed, and then people aren't writing up, oh, she did that right or wrong. There isn't constant sort of evaluation. And that is a huge factor in where it's the most common in different fields. So it's where constant review is happening by very talented peers. So I'm assuming in your field, there's pretty quick sort of evaluation that occurs. Is that true?
Yeah. So, I mean, of course, there's a couple of different checkpoints or what to see. But so, for example, if you're writing a lot of code, usually what you do is code reviews, right? So the whole team is looking at the code to try to spot errors and help people out, and, enforcing certain guidelines and stuff like that. So that is definitely part of it. I know that every time I commit my code or send my code to our source server, someone is going to look at it, because that is part of like the process for getting the code into the next step. And then the next step, of course, is you have quality assurance. So people are definitely going to take a look at it, right? And then in the end, depending on what field you have, you're deploying it to your customers, and then they are going to review that, not the code itself, but the functionality, right? So, and on top of that, like for me, we discussed that the other day, like since I'm working for an American company, we have review periods, which is every quarter, right? So we get feedback on what we did good and bad every quarter, which is something we discussed in the other program, not as usual in Swedish companies. So that is also part of it. I think that there is a couple of different places where you're getting reviewed, and also, development teams are usually small teams, right? So there is a lot of discussion around basically everything you do in a group. That's my experience, at least. I don't know, Amanda, Fredrik, anything to add to that in terms of your work being reviewed?
But I feel like even if you go through like peer reviews and such, the code, your job is to like write code or to find bugs. And if you don't, it's very clear that the code that broke was written by you, or that every single piece of code can be connected to one person's like submitting that piece of code. Yeah. Like if I like to compare it to being like working in psychology, if you have a client, then you talk to the client, and like the overall, the end is the result. Like no one judges like every piece of every conversation. Like I feel like that is a difference between the fields.
Absolutely. Can I throw something in there too? That I have a built-in thing. If they don't get better, well, they were just really crazy, right? And so, I mean, no one is like, I mean, people will refer me to other people like, oh, it really helped me. Right. Well, the people who it didn't help, they're not going to refer me. So I don't get the feedback maybe ever. So absolutely, totally different spectrum. whereas you guys, the whole project falls apart if you have put a comma in the wrong spot, like it's
right.
It's really clear. And that's got to be really stressful.
It can definitely be, right? And I feel like the review period, like the code review stuff that is becoming so commonplace that code doesn't go in unless at least a couple of people have looked at the code. That can be both the best thing ever and the worst thing ever, right? Because it can get held up by someone who's writing the paragraphs really hard and saying like, hey, you put a space too much here and you put this comma in the wrong place, not because of any functionality issue, but because it doesn't look right? So there can definitely be, like, that is a hard problem also to... the idea is that more eyes makes it better, but sometimes more eyes makes it very stressful as well, right? Because someone is going to comment on every piece. And I can imagine that if you're a more junior programmer like you, Amanda, that when you're doing code reviews the first couple of times, it's way more stressful than it is for me that has been doing it for 20 years, right?
Yeah, but also I feel like the people that have reviewed my code since I'm junior, they have like they prioritize what to focus on when they do a code review. So I've had a pretty easy time about that. So that's not. I feel like my imposter syndrome comes more from me than from
anyone
people
else.
Like, yeah.
Yes. And that's a really good point, because it doesn't matter what field you're in. You can have these, of course, you're going to be reviewed at some point and you'll have feedback, but why I think we find it more commonly in fields that have constant peer review, and, the music industry or actresses and actors and, comedians, you have sort of a thing that they do, and then there's judgment, and then people write a bunch of articles. That constant feedback can really throw someone off sort of confidence wise. But we're referring to something that sort of started maybe a long time ago and then just gets exacerbated in our fields of employment. So let's talk about Amy, or Amanda, I'm sorry, I called you Amy. Amanda, something specific with gender is maybe something you can speak to in your own experience, but let me just throw these sort of statistics out, is that it's more common in women. Imposter syndrome is more common in women. I don't have the exact numbers on that. The belief is that men don't report it as much. We do know that in situations where men and women are faced with something they're not so sure they can do or they're qualified to do, men and women do very different things. So women often, and it's not everyone, that's not 100% both ways, but women will often work harder and sort of almost kill themselves to accomplish the thing that they're expected to accomplish. And more often we find that men will just not do the thing. They will avoid the thing that might expose their weakness.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and we're not exactly sure why. Some of that might just be sort of the way girls and boys are reared a little differently in that interpretation. But here's a great study that explains this, and I find it just so fascinating. So some researchers in the States were looking at why women make less money for the same job in the States, and what's happening there. How is that possible? And a lot comes down to how they negotiate salary, etc. Sort of a level of confidence, a level kind of imposter syndrome showing up, sort of like, I don't deserve this anyway, so I'll take the smallest amount, they'll offer. But this study was really interesting because they took men and women and they had them apply for all of these various jobs. And what they found is that men will apply for a job that they are 60% qualified for and just sort of wing it. And women will, yeah, exactly. And women will apply for jobs they're 100% qualified for, and sometimes not even then. So that to me is an example of that extreme sort of the symptoms or the bad results of imposter syndrome is that you reduce your options. You sort of box yourself into what you can or can't do, even though your actual skills on paper and in real life, maybe you're well qualified, you're perfect for the job, or, you do deserve a raise, etc. It's the internalization of that from?
I have a perfect example of that. I have a friend, and she applied for a job, and the salary they offered her was higher than she expected. So she one reason for her to decline the job offer was that I don't deserve that. The salary they're going to pay me implies that I know more than I actually do, and that was a reason for her to like decline that job. I explicitly told her, no, that's not a reason to not take a job. But that was a serious issue for her.
Right. That's like shining a
crazy.
spotlight on
Yeah.
you're a fraud and you're paid way too much. They for sure are going to know.
Yeah. That's crazy.
How about, Amanda, for you in your industry? What has been there's, I assume, not a ton of women that have the same position or do what they do, or I totally don't know. So educate me on this. How is your experience with this?
Yeah, but first of all, I've known since I've known about imposter syndrome, I've known that it's more common in women, like according to statistics, as you say, at least, and also more quite common within like IT or development or programming. So I have that, but then there's like maybe 25% of people who study IT courses and programs at the universities are women, but most of the women go on to non-programming roles like test or UX or something like that. Very few women head on to working as programmers, or they do that for a short while and then they move on to like project owners or other non-programming roles. So being a female programmer and staying a female programmer is not super extremely rare, but it's not. The portion of programming women are still smaller.
It's small. How does that impact your imposter syndrome? Do you think connected?
I don't know, but I don't feel like being a female developer is like affecting me that much. Not like directly. Maybe it's more the culture thing. Like we've talked about this in this podcast, that many guys that do program have done that for a very long time, like since they were 10 or 15, and I started when I was maybe 22. I don't know. I feel like that affects me more than being like a female.
Right.
How about you boys? What do you think?
I think that, my imposter syndrome definitely comes through when I don't know, when I'm pushed beyond my limits, of course, like and getting in, especially into since I'm a senior developer at this point. Usually what most companies do is that to start put you in charge of other people, right? Leading groups, leading teams, taking care of all the planning stuff and things like that. And that's really when I start feeling like, oh shit, I'm doing something that is way outside my comfort zone. And I definitely feel like every time my review period comes around, people are going to tell me that I suck at doing like the whole management bit. So that is definitely something that I feel. I also, like, early on in my career, I stopped programming at my second job because I felt like the guys I was with was so much better than I. So I just searched out other things to do at that company instead of improving my coding skills. I actually did that in my spare time. This is when I was 20, right? So I actually had spare time. And it took me 5 years of working with customers directly and doing other things, documentation, installations, stuff like that, for me to feel like I've also worked on my programming skills on the side, so enough to go back into that field. So that took me quite some time, and I remember it was a real crisis of confidence as well, because I was kind of thought I was a programmer until I met these guys that was so much better than me, and I felt like I'm no programmer, they are programmers. I am just a fake that is trying to do whatever. And yeah, so that is, I think that's my strongest memory of that feeling. I definitely have had it other places as well, like doing presentations, like going up on a stage doing presentations and stuff like that, and has always felt uncomfortable to me, even though I usually get pretty good feedback afterwards. But yeah,
I wonder too with that feeling. I mean, you think about what is the difference between someone starts a job and they think they're a programmer, and then everyone around them is amazing. Mm-hmm. And they think, this is the best opportunity of my life. I have all these people to learn from,
right?
And I'm going to go hide in the corner and never program again. Yeah. It's simply the story that you tell yourself about that moment. And here's where this gets, thanks Tobias for the lead into criticizing your ego. Sorry about this, but it leads to really the secret of imposter syndrome is your ego. It's big enough that the world is revolving around you, right? You think you're sort of important enough to be sort of be hurt by the situation and then go in the corner and sort of do something else. And if you take somebody who's just young and stupid and they have no idea, they're just like, okay, let's do this. Wow, I get to play basketball with the greatest basketball player on earth, rather than I should be as good as the greatest basketball player on earth, or whatever field you're in or wherever you are. There is something about our ego that actually gets in our way that creates this. And a lot of it comes down to the story you tell yourself about your value, who you are. And for some people, this comes very naturally. They're going to go in a situation and be like, sweet, everyone's better than me. That means I'm only getting better.
Right.
But most people, at least 70%, have the opposite reaction. And so to identify for yourself where this comes from, so I'm going to take it from the big stage to the individual here a little bit, is what happened to you? And you don't have to answer this, Tobias, but what happened to you specifically that led to this? So some things we know about imposter syndrome that's pretty common as a theme for most people is they were pretty protected as children, sort of the curling parent dynamic maybe, and they weren't allowed to fail a lot. There was a bit of sort of rushing and making sure that the person was okay, or the child didn't get embarrassed or essentially didn't gain any muscle around failing, making mistakes, or getting better and trying harder, kind of that dynamic. It was a little too much protected. So we know that. We also know sometimes a lack of a father figure is a big factor here, which can be, one of the weird roles a dad plays is pride. Like, oh, I made my dad proud, or, oh, dad is so mad at me, I totally screwed that up. Sort of that sort of dance that you learn as a child with a father. And sometimes the lack of a father means that dance doesn't get practiced either. And sometimes, a terrible dad's a terrible thing. But sometimes an average dad can sort of, just by being that role, you can gain some of this different kind of muscle. And then there's this other factor that's interesting, that non-supportive friends are pretty common in folks who experience imposter syndrome. I went to New York once to visit a friend. She was a dancer there and trying to make the Broadway thing. And none of that appeals to me at all, other than I love that city. It's so fun. But so I just sort of observed as a dorky scientist that I think I am. And I have never witnessed this ever anywhere else. I'm sure it exists. But every conversation with every person included, so what are you doing? And it wasn't like, how are you? That's the American thing to do. Say, hi, how are you? And you don't really expect the truth. You just say, good. How are you? Good. And then you move on. But in New York, it is, what are you working on? What are you doing? And as this happened over and over, and I noticed the responses, everyone gave each other a list. Well, I'm doing this production, and then I'm choreographing my own, and these were mainly dancers and performers. But the list was of 10 items. And if you couldn't say 10 things you were doing, then what are you doing in New York? And so to me, that was like a really obvious case of the frenemy situation, where it's like, oh, I love you, but really, do I need to be threatened by you? Did you get the part I was going out for or whatever? So this non-supportive friend thing can also be a factor in just not feeling maybe okay with who you are, what you're doing, despite if it was good or bad. Sort of the good friend who's just like, whatever, I don't care that you bombed that test. Let's go get a hamburger. I don't have to perform for friends. Kind of an important one. So as I said those three things, did any of those ring any bells? You don't have to say if you don't want to, but I wonder.
Yeah, but I understand. I can relate to a couple of them. But I feel like, for example, I didn't do sports when I was little. Like, I never competed in anything. Could that be like related, like as achievements go, that I wasn't taught how to fail because I never didn't won a contest. I used to practice like swimming, but I never engaged in the competitions.
Right.
Yeah, because I didn't want to, and I was already then like afraid that I'm gonna go there and I'm gonna be the worst and I'm gonna lose. So what's the point? I'm not gonna go there just to fail.
Right. And yes, actually, there is a correlation. So in the 80s and 90s, they started putting a lot more money into women's sports in the United States, and I was very much benefited by that. I played a lot of sports, and so I've been interested in sort of following outcomes of girls who played sports at a younger age. Could be dance to football, whatever. Football in this soccer sense. Sorry, I'm in Sweden now.
Right.
But whatever it is, and what they have found is just overall on confidence scores, they do better. They do have less imposter syndrome. There are these benefits, and really a big factor is it comes down to the teamwork that happens. It's kind of the opposite of the frenemy thing. Like, they need you to succeed for them to succeed. So it's sort of the group effort can be really valuable. Learning to lose, obviously the fun of camaraderie of winning and all those good things. And then having your body be something that's powerful, not just an object for someone else to use. And so there's a lot of really great benefits. And a huge one in regards to imposter syndrome, I think, is relevant is this losing. In fact, we have a kid who, there's types of imposter syndrome. I can go into those. And one of them is the natural genius. And it's folks who are just smart, and people have told them in their whole lives they're smart.
Oh, yes.
And when it comes to trying something new, they're really hesitant, because if they don't do well, it goes against what they're supposed to be. They're supposed to be smart, which is like a static thing, as opposed to learning, as opposed to growing, as opposed to screwing up and fixing it. It's the opposite. It's, you should already be done. You're already cooked. You're a full-on genius already. And I have a kid who is pretty bright. I have a bunch of dumb ones too, so don't worry. But I have one smart one. And we are so careful about this, because he was born with this sort of, I don't want to do it because I probably can't. And if I can't, that means I'm not smart. I mean, it's amazing. At 3 and 4, we could see this happening. So we're always like, you're a good trier, try not to be too smart. But we put him in baseball when we were in the States, because you strike out a lot. The numbers are so bad. I mean, the best baseball player in the world can barely get close to a third or fourth or fifth of the hits in a game. And so we wanted him to repeatedly suck, and it worked. He was terrible, and it happened again and again and again. And we'd always tell him, this is science, just keep going. And eventually he sort of got used to striking out, and then it felt good when he didn't. And so it really is tricky, because when do we put ourselves in positions to fail on purpose? Mm-hmm. And if we didn't do that as children, because our parents have bubble wrapped us, it's a lot scary as an adult, because a lot more rides on it, and our brains are bigger.
But I feel like failing is like my biggest fear. Being a failure. So why would you I understand why, but the feeling that I have is, why would I do that if there's a huge risk that I will fail?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so
That
A
really
little bit
rings a bell
bubble
for me
wrapped.
too.
Yeah.
It's weird though, because you can have it in different, like, this is probably a dumb analogy, but like I feel I definitely can have the same fear when it comes to certain parts of my job, especially the management part, right? Like I feel like, okay, I'm going to structure this whole new project and it's scaring the shit out of me, because if we don't, and recently it's been a lot of problems leading to, you know, having to delay the project I'm working on with. If I sit down and think about it, I feel like these are reasons outside my control, right? These are not because I did a bad job estimating or whatever. It's just outside my control. But I get such an angst about like not doing the stuff on time, and it has to be because I'm a bad manager, you know, because it's I guess it has to do with not having the experience enough in that. But take something else. Like I know that writing the code, I would never be angry at the programmers I work with, because I know that, you know, shit happens, right? And if they can explain why something went wrong, and that is usually never a problem. And another way to, and here is where it comes into dumb analogy time, but I've been watching my kid play video games recently, and he's soon 8, and he comes to like a place in Mario where he has to jump or do something like that, and he gets like paralyzed and just doesn't even want to try it because it looks like I can never make that, right? And that's what he's saying. Hey, Dad, can you do this for me? Because there is no way I can do this. And I remember when I was a kid, like I don't know how many times I failed when I played Mario. I just kept going until I cleared it. It could take days and weeks, right? Because I don't know, that was just a very different mindset for me back then. And I feel the same way. Like I never get upset when I play video games these days, because I know that, you know, if you fail the first time, you can just try again. But I'm scared as shit when it comes to like the work part, right? And I don't want to fail because I feel like I only have one life compared to when I do something in a video game or similar things.
Yeah, but it's also interesting about when the fear triggers, so to speak, because I think my original source of this is this not wanting to lose, or some variation thereof. But I noticed that it's different what triggers it, even inside work situations. I mean, taking on something new that I haven't tried code-wise might be really scary sometimes, but suddenly being thrown an assignment about something I usually don't do, it can feel fun and exciting, because something in that makes me feel that, okay, they just threw me this. They didn't give any instructions. It could have been scary as hell, but for some reason I'm just, okay, I'll play around with this, because they provided such unclear instructions. I can do anything, and suddenly I'm sort of free from it.
Right.
Fredrik, you've hit like the magic button. It's called play.
Yes.
It's playing. So when your kid is, so the work of children is to play, said by a famous psychologist. But the work of children is to play. And so children and adults who don't play don't do well. They don't thrive in life.
Oh, interesting.
And so when you get some work to do and there's no instructions, your brain goes to like, oh, I can't screw this up because they didn't tell me what to do. So I'm just going to play. That is free. And we call that a flow state, when you sort of have enough skills and your mind and your skills sort of join. People often experience this with athletics or with dancing or singing, or it can be anything, of course, but obviously you can do it coding. And I get it with therapy all the time, that everything is just like moving together, and it is the coolest feeling. And it's because you've done all the work to get the skills, and then, the timing is right for something, and anyway, you get flow. But play is really important. So if you think about your job, whoever's listening, if you think about your job, how often are you playing? And I don't mean like avoiding work. That's not playing in this sense. But like maybe in your regular life, are you playing? Whether it's a game or, when you play a video game, Tobias, you're playing, right? But your kid is struggling a little bit with having work come into his play. And that's a tricky, you're observing this thing that we all do as adults. It happens obviously as we grow up a lot more. And the less and less kids play, the more this sort of comes into play too, which is, this matter? Does it matter? No. It's just the same. You could look at him playing Mario Kart and say, it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter at all.
Right.
But guess what? I'm going to stand over your code and go, yeah, whatever you're doing right now doesn't matter. And you could come to my office and be like, what you're doing right now, that does not matter.
Right.
It doesn't. Right. Nothing actually matters. Are any of us blowing up the whole planet? No. But minus that, everything else kind of doesn't matter. So if we could lighten up and play more, I think people would be shocked at how different they would experience stuff. But it's not as easy as just like, okay, brain, turn off. I'm now going to play.
Right.
Sometimes you got to do very specific things. Are you guys ready to hear some of the solutions, or do you want?
Yes,
please.
Okay, so let me first just describe 5 types of imposter syndrome and see if you guys, sort of fall into any of these. I think it's helpful because I think sometimes people maybe don't always feel that, well, I'm not that kind of, I don't do that, but I do this other. Anyway, so number one, and probably a most common one, is the perfectionist, right? So the perfectionist and imposter syndrome, they go hand in hand. It's incredibly high goals for yourself. You fail to reach the goals, then you have self-doubt. You worry about measuring up. Then the next time you can do something that you're really good at, you do it great, but it wasn't perfect. And then it just cycles. Here we are. I'm never good enough. I work incredibly hard to try to do something, but I fail, which means I'm bad, blah, 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 blah. And then, you sort of keep going. So a way to sort of figure out if you're the perfectionist or not is answer these questions silently. Have you ever been accused of being a micromanager? Do you have great difficulty delegating? When you miss a really crazy high mark on something, do you accuse yourself of not being good enough or not being cut out for the job that you have? You think about it forever. And do you feel like your work must be 100% all the time? So that tends to be the perfectionist. Then the next one is the superwoman, superman. And these are people who are convinced that they're phonies among, like kind of what you said to Tobias with, I'm a phony, everyone here is a real programmer.
Right.
You are just hiding. And you have a cover up, right? You're Clark Kent and you're just pretending you know what you're doing when you don't.
Right.
And this usually means that they will compensate for these insecurities with major workaholic behavior. So if this applies to you, let me ask you a couple questions. You can answer silently. Do you stay later at the office than the rest of your team, even past the point that you've completed those tasks that are necessary? Do you stress when you're not working and find downtime completely wasteful? That, or you have to completely like shut off by playing, World of Warcraft or something, like you have to escape.
Right.
You can't just sort of be, it's either working or escaping. Have you let your hobbies or passions fall by the wayside so you can work? And do you feel like you haven't truly earned your title, even though some of these studies are astounding. People with 3-4 degrees are like, I'm not qualified to teach a basic class, just kind of amazing. But then you compensate by doing way, way, way too much. So this is often the workaholics type. So the third one is my kid, the natural genius. And it's sort of their internal bar is really high and they're really judgmental against themselves based on that. And so if they can't do something the first time, then they just kind of freak out. It sets off all sorts of alarms. You're not good enough. You're, that type of thing. So here's the questions for that. Do you have a track record of getting straight A's and gold stars in everything you do? Were you told frequently as a child you were the smart one, the family or the peer group? Do you dislike the idea of having a mentor because you can handle it yourself? when you're faced with a setback, your confidence just nosedives and you feel a lot of shame. Do you avoid challenges because it's uncomfortable? If you're to try something maybe you don't know you're good at. Okay. Then the fourth one is the individualist. And this is someone who just does it on their own, refuses help from anyone else, partly to avoid getting caught for being phony. Right. So the question there is, do you firmly feel that you need to accomplish things on your own? I don't need to ask anyone's help. Do you say that a lot? And do you sort of ask for help in terms of the product or the project? If you do ask for help, it's based purely on that. It's never like, hey, I need some help. It's always this project needs you to do something kind of thing. And then the fifth one is the expert. And this one is that they've somehow tricked, and this is really common, they've tricked their employer into hiring them, that they are supposedly just completely not qualified, and somehow they've tricked everybody. In fact, the sort of opening question of the starting class of the Stanford School of, I think it's business or something, they ask everyone to raise their hands. They feel like that there was somehow a glitch in the system and they accidentally got into the program. And like 2/3 of people raise their hand. No. And this is exactly this incredibly difficult program. You have to like 20 million steps to get in. There's no way somebody accidentally let you in. But fully 2/3 of people feel like they shouldn't be there.
Right.
Okay. So those are the types. So let's talk about what we can do about it. So do you guys know which one you are? Did any of those fit you? Or are you all of them?
I think I've fit into like the three in the middle. Maybe most. Yeah, I think I'm more one of them than the other two, perhaps. But I'm not. I'm still fluctuating back and forth.
We'll give you time to decide.
I think the last one is most similar to me, or maybe the one where you do individualist, where I do a lot of things myself, and I feel like every time, like I fear of asking for help or bringing it up. That is probably more my way of handling it. I think.
How about you, Amanda?
I recognize myself in in all of them, but I think number 5 is the expert is my biggest.
Be interesting if we could just take all programmers and find out what there is, if there's a theme. I would say in my field, it's definitely the expert, because people do ask you to tell them things, and you're like, I should know this. Now I have to make it up, and now I'm faking it, and all of that. Okay, so let's go. And I have 8 ideas that you can try to sort of help with this. First of all, do you guys have anything you have tried? Anything that you found helpful, or you heard of people doing?
No, I think that, what I've been doing is to really try to, it comes back to this 3-month or quarterly review period. I've been really trying to not read just the negative part, but really read and try to really internalize the positive part. Focus on that and reading it out loud to myself. And if I have a bad day, I can kind of open that document up and see that works for me, because I feel like I have usually very positive and nice reviews where the small parts are not intruding too much. I feel like I can understand and explain those, but I usually, before I started to really focus on the positive parts in that's all I ever saw. And I think that's the common thing, right? You always see the negative stuff. But yeah, so I think that has definitely helped me. And also I think it's an experience part as well. I've been with my current company for almost 6 years. So a lot of people, a lot of the things people ask me for these days, I do know. There is not the feeling that I have to fake it because I'm not really sure, but I actually do know a lot of it. So that, I mean, that helps, of course. I don't know if it addresses the root of the problem, but it definitely helps, right? So
okay, that's a really powerful one, actually. It's absorbing. I call it absorbing the good. Because we tend to, our brains tend to act like Teflon with good things, right? Like you tell me nice things and I just let that slide off because I can give you 10 reasons why that nice thing might have happened.
Yeah.
It's not about me. But then if you tell me a negative thing, it's about my core soul as a human being, right? Like it goes right through the Teflon and pierces you in your heart. And some of that comes naturally. So let me explain really briefly. That comes from that we have evolved as a species from folks who had to survive. So that, the sort of calm person meditating by the side of a lake did not have children because they were eaten by something. Yes, exactly. But the ones who are a little bit stressed out, the ones whose brains were attuned to noises, sounds, colors that kept them alive and safe, this has been handed down. We have within our structures, a very primal part of our brain that says, if something bad could happen, I need to know, and I need to know early. So anything negative or smells of that it could turn into something, bad for me, I need to be hyper attuned to that and ready to jump on it. So someone says, well, you didn't do such a great job with this. Your brain goes right to that. So this is not your fault. You aren't broken. It's actually how the system is supposed to work. But what code you did or didn't do right is not related to your survival. But our brains aren't smart enough to have figured that it's not a tiger. It still thinks
stupid brains.
Still thinks it's just as important, right? And so it's a matter of sort of doing some brain training. And so say you get some negative feedback and you actually have to talk yourself. You have to use your newest part of your brain, which is the front part that's logical, to talk the back part of your brain into, I'm okay. It's okay. World's not going to end, sort of breathe through it. And then also this other idea that Tobias said is when there are good things, your brain wants to go, yeah, that's not important to survival. But it really is important for thriving, so work to absorb that, read that. Instead of making excuses, stop yourself, take a breath and absorb that. So that's great. Awesome. Anyone else have any ideas?
I do. I try to do approximately the same thing. Because like talking about this has helped me a lot. Like knowing that imposter syndrome is a thing. I've tried to both like writing down when people say good things or when I do a good thing, to be able to remember that when I feel like an imposter or feel horrible, to be able to remember.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And also like just that the imposter syndrome is a thing. And the more I talk to people about it, as you said, 70% of people who are asked feel like they experience imposter syndrome, and everyone I've talked to feel this as well. Yeah. And talking to people that I know are good or have feel confident that they have felt the same thing, and I know that they know stuff, or they feel confident. Makes me feel like, okay, this is not a thing. This is just something that society or my body is telling me to shock me, but it's not who I am or who I have to be. So this is normal, but also don't bother even thinking about it, because it's probably based on a lie.
Right. It's common, normal, but it doesn't have to, I don't have to buy into it at the same
exactly.
time. Yeah. Nice. Those were two of my lists, so good job.
Yeah. I also did a thing where I talked to my boss about if I have, what is it that exactly I feel that I am an imposter at? Is there something that I can do to actually become better at that? So I can feel that I'm actually evolving, and having a plan that I'm actually becoming better, makes me feel like when I feel like I'm an imposter, then at least I'm trying to do something about it. I'm working on it. I'm absolutely not the perfectionist kind of imposter syndrome, or the the one. Superwoman, Superman was the one that working overtime. Like I'm not that kind of imposter syndrome victim, so I can feel like I'm doing something, but I don't have to do it like 80 hours a week to
you don't have to overcompensate, basically.
Yeah, but I know that I'm doing something. Like I have a concrete plan, and that helps me.
That's awesome, and it's part of the. I don't know how old you are, Amanda, but that's like the part of the developmental cycle of us as adults is we become more and more competent. The stage of life, 20 to 40, is the competence stage. We are establishing competence at something. So we shouldn't be at 21. And I hate that we have billionaire 21-year-olds. That should not exist because it's ridiculous and annoying. But I think, which leads to one other one, which is we have one person maybe that we compare ourselves to. Notice like there could be like 20 programmers around you who are like you, but then there's the one shining, ridiculous one we can never compete with. Like we just got to stop comparing ourselves to that person, because it is a normal developmental process to improve our skills, to feel more confident, and that's okay. It's ridiculous to be 20 and perfectly confident. That's not normal. It's not healthy.
Another unhealthy like comparison thing that I do, or I try not to do, but I still do, is compare myself to like the best of everyone else.
Yeah.
Like, okay, person A is great at this thing, and person B is great at another thing, and person C is great at this third thing. But I don't see that these are three different people. That it's unreasonable for me to be great at all those three things, and I also don't see their like what they're poor at that I might be good at. So I compare myself to the combination of everybody, and that's impossible to impossible standards.
And imagine if you could do the opposite. You just looked at everyone's weaknesses and compared your strength. I mean, you'd be a jerk, right? Like the opposite's not great, but it's true. It's a very natural thing for the brain to do. So getting the front of your brain online, saying, okay, hold on, let me walk through. What am I doing right now? I'm taking through, and even if you write it out, that can be a great exercise, is to physically, I know that's a strange concept anymore, is use a pen and paper and write out this stuff, because it helps us process. It takes a little longer than typing. It has a little more fun in the brain, and it helps us sort of let go of some of the fears and the stories as we write it out. So that might be a thing to do. Draw your three people, right? There are things you compare yourself to, and get your prefrontal cortex online saying, okay, hold on, that's impossible. I can't be a cellist, a dancer, and a professional swimmer. I can't. That's not possible, right? So that's great. Those are good ones.
Fredrik,
how about you, Fredrik?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it's been a lot about communication, a lot of what Amanda was talking about, like both consciously talking and reading and writing as well about like imposter syndrome and things like that, but also just communication in general. The more people I talk to, the more I realize or actually process that, you know, people are good at different things, and everyone has similar problems in different ways. And sometimes I even realize that, wait a minute, I know a bit more about this thing than this person does. So it sort of humanizes everyone I meet. Strangely, they're also people. It's really weird. And also this part about thinking about the negative things or the problems people might have that I look up to. I only see this positive Instagram aspect. They're on holiday in Hawaii and they're running a mile in 3 minutes and everything else. But it's not the same person. And also, if this person is really good at running the mile in 3 minutes, even if I look up to that part, would I like to be the person exercising 8 hours per day to be able to achieve that? That's a thought that helps me.
And what's the trade-off of that, right? Because that
exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that is definitely something I feel with like the management part. Like I feel like, I could be such a better manager if I didn't do any of the coding stuff. But I do know that if I stop doing the coding stuff, I'll probably lose interest in the work I'm doing, right? So for me, it's also like that has been a conscious choice for me to not care so much about that, I guess.
And and you know this thing that faces everyone, it's called the 40s. And you spend your,
No,
you
not
spend
me.
your, well, no, none of you are going to face this, but you spend your whole life moving forward and you're building a life and what is success and comparing yourself to everyone else. I mean, all of those are normal developmental processes, human things that we do. But what is this magical thing called age 43 where everyone's like, what am I doing?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, sort of reassessing everything because suddenly half your life is gone and you have to look at the other half and you're like, do I really want to do this stuff? And not to say everyone should have their midlife crisis when they're 25, but if you could maybe integrate some of the questions people ask when they're 45, which is, do I love this? Is this good for me? Rather than, does this make me more money? Does this give me more prestige or power? Do I move? I mean, these are very steps too. Do I move up? Do I, you know, whatever? And then you get to a point where, are you really building the life that you want to build? And if the voice in your head that says you're a fraud gets to dominate, then you end up building a life maybe you're not choosing, more in a response to not feeling maybe shame or not, you know, sort of handling some of these feelings. Great. You guys all had great ideas. So let me throw a couple other ones in there. The one I want to just repeat that Amanda said that was so great is calling it by its name. There is a lot of power when Harry Potter just called him Voldemort, right? Just say it. Say his name. There's power in it, sort of depowerizes it. That's not even a word. But to create to recognize that this is a thing. 70% of people have it. In fact, you could have some fun with this. Sit down next to someone who's just performed and just lean over and say, so do you feel like a fraud? And see what happens, right? They'd be like, oh, I've been found out. And you just say, don't worry, I'm a fraud too, right? All of us are kind of in the same boat. And, you know, recognizing that can be really powerful. Kind of like what you said, Frederick. Calling it by what its name, study about it, figure it out a little bit, talk to your friends about it. You'll be surprised at how very not alone you are. Which leads,
but I feel like it's if you feel like you're a fraud, it's what's like the opposite of humble or modest to say, oh, it's not that I feel like I suck and people tell me that I suck and I did this horrible thing and this horrible thing, but nah, it's not because I suck, it's just imposter syndrome. It feels like counterintuitive to like, I'm horrible, but it's probably no biggie, it's just imposter syndrome.
You know, that is a great point, and especially because you guys are Swedish. In fact, I'm keep forgetting to ask this of you. Okay, ready, everyone? Help me understand how Swedish culture and imposter syndrome are connected. Because to some extent, this sort of, it is, you know, most of your organizational charts are flat. I have been in so many Swedish meetings that I want to scream, like, somebody just make a decision, because there's no leader, and we just plan to meet again, and I'm like, I'm the only one who seems to notice this, right? And it's because I'm used to, there's a CEO in the room who has the final say, right? And in these cases, there isn't. And so I'm wondering how these might be connected with Jantelagen, or, you know, whatever this sort of, you can't be too cool. And you need to be, you know, somebody help me.
But Jantelagen makes it like, my interpretation of Jantelagen is that if you are like, that makes it harder to accept compliments or like good job. Then you have to say it's no, it was a team effort, or it wasn't that hard. I just Googled it, or like, you always, it's in the culture to have these excuses that it wasn't you that did this thing.
Right. Everything is like everything in Sweden is like a team thing, right? That is definitely something. I think it's changing to be more individualistic, but like for so long, everything is about the social group, and there is never like the classic example is like Peter Forsberg, the best hockey player, probably, like he's always like, oh no, it was a team, and like he did all the work himself, and it's like, oh, it was a team, right? And then Swedes get really annoyed by someone like Zlatan, which does say like, I'm the best, right? And we were like, oh, he's such a jerk, you know? And even if it's true or not, and that is definitely, I think, part of the psyche of the Swedish people. Like you have to, it's almost criminal to not acknowledge that it was not all you. It has to be a team effort if you did something good. It was,
but even if it's you, if it's like you are good at math, no, it just I haven't like. It's easy for me. It's not that I did something. I just have.
Right.
I've always been good at math. Nothing I did. Just
right. And boasting in general is super hard for Swedes, right? You never talk about how fantastic you are at something, and that's why I think so many Swedes find Americans so annoying as well, because they like what Swedes are when Americans present themselves is just another over exaggeration on how good they are for like 30 minutes, right? And that's, I think, why Swedes a lot of times says, oh, that American, he or she is just talking about themselves all the time, right? Because we don't do that. It's so uncommon to, like, you're not even allowed to talk about how much money you earn or what kind of accomplishments you have done. It's considered super rude, and I think that is definitely part of it, right?
Absolutely. And I have a funny personal anecdote. My father-in-law came into town and we had a midsummer party, lots and lots of people. And he walked around and every person he met, he asked them what they did for a living. And I was like, no, that's not what you do. And, they'd say things like, oh, I'm a dad. And he'd be like, what? You're a dad? What does that mean? Like just this sort of, and they were so uncomfortable. And they have, there's a grain of salt because they're like, oh, it's an American, but it's true. And, we grew up in America, like, okay, give us your 30-second elevator pitch on why you should be in this first grade class. Like we compete so young and we're presenting ourselves so early. And so, yes, it's a huge difference. I think what's interesting though, I, as an American and many people I know also struggle with taking compliments. It's not like I think we're overcompensating a little. Can you tell in America we tend to do that? And we're not, it's fake confidence if anything, right? And so I hear all the time, especially women just saying, oh, you give them a compliment. No, it was something else that deserves that compliment. So I want to throw out a suggestion for people just to try, because it's not anti-Swedish to do this, but it will be alarming. And that is to just say, thank you. So they say, wow, you did a great job on that project. You say, thank you. And then bite your tongue until it bleeds. And you will find something happens. First of all, what happens when you're a complimenter? So I give someone a compliment, say, oh, you look great today, or wow, you did a really good job on that thing. And then they instantly downplay it. It's actually, it's kind of rude, right? Like, okay. And you sort of feel like you've been shut down. So the nice thing would actually be to say, thank you. And then to make you feel better, this is a little trick, is you say, you're so kind to say that. So you just flip the compliment back. And that helps relieve that feeling of like, I'm not supposed to accept a compliment. I'm not supposed to be allowed to be told I'm okay. So it's this sick irony of life, right? Everyone walks around not feeling good enough. And then when someone tells them they're good enough, they have to deflect it, right? Mm-hmm. And so it becomes sort of a vicious cycle. But so I could see, it's one thing I actually love about Sweden. So I don't want any of you to change it. So is that fine? Do you just stay that way? Because it's lovely, except your meetings do drive me crazy.
Right.
Okay. So let me go on to a couple other ones. Here's an idea. You kind of piggybacking on the exposure or sort of writing stuff, is to think about exposing yourself totally. So sit down with a piece of paper and a pen. Write out all the ways you're a fraud, all the ways you fooled someone, every single time you tricked someone into giving you an award, every time you should not have gotten a pay raise, whatever it is, just expose all of your fraudulent self, write it all on a piece of paper, and then you can burn it. No one has to actually see it. But the power of getting it out of that space between your ears, that's the most dangerous place for thoughts to live. You got to get them out to see them more clearly.
Right.
And it'll feel good. It'll be like vomiting. Just trust me, try it.
Is that a good feeling?
Afterwards.
It is afterwards.
Exactly, afterwards, right? And then treat it like a business or an experiment. So play with this a little. Back to the word play. It's very important to play. Play with this idea a little bit. So try my compliment trick. Like say, thank you. You're so kind for saying that. Try that a couple times and just notice how you feel. Notice how the person looks. Just see what happens. I got a text the other day, just because you guys are sweet. It's so funny. I got a text the other day from an American friend here, just out of nowhere. And he wrote, I just passed 19 Swedes and said, hello, how are you to every one of them, just for kicks. And I wrote back, I said, oh, what happened? And he's like, 12 of them looked down and walked faster. I mean, he just did a science experiment and it just made his day go better, right?
Yeah.
So
and it's left a trail of confusion behind.
Exactly. Just play a little bit. Like try, and your boss comes and gives you feedback and you're not sure what's positive or negative, and think, okay, if I was a scientist, what would I do in this moment? Right now I feel confused and concerned. My normal idea would be to panic. How about I draw 2 lines on a piece of paper and I write out everything he said and I decide if it's positive or negative. Or I talk to a friend about this and process it out of my head. And just experiment with what, maybe some things work better for you than others, but to try different things to see what can be really helpful for you. And then maybe what doesn't work. And then the final thing I'll say that's can be really a helpful mantra is that being wrong does not make you fake. So where we have equated falseness or fraudulence with mistakes is to me stems back to sort of a curling parent idea, right? If I don't want my kid to get hurt, I will make everything smooth for them so they get all the opportunities they ever need, and all the things my parents didn't do for me, I will do for them, and then they literally gain zero ability to handle real life. So then what comes along is I make a mistake. Something goes bad. I screw up. And we have thousands of hours of videotape of people not apologizing. I'm sure you've seen this in America. They make a mistake and then they come out on tape and then they apologize in quotes because it's not an apology. Because no one knows how to just own it, right? And some of that comes from not a lot of practice at making mistakes and owning them, doing it again, and so we've equated making a mistake with I'm bad, and then if I do good stuff, that bad still is so strong that I must be a fraud. So that's kind of where the weird underlying story sort of begins. And so sort of get into your head that just because you've been wrong doesn't make you fake. It actually makes you real. Like it's actually a sign that you're real, and that's the goal, right?
Yeah, that's very interesting and useful, I think, for a lot of people. We have a couple of shorter questions. I wanted to do like kind of a lightning round here so we don't take too much of everyone's time. But we've been talking about what you can do yourself in terms of helping but very quickly, do you think there's something that a company can do to kind of help their new recruits or junior personnel or whatever to kind of get over this? Is there something you could recommend for people, like a company, to look into?
Well, the first thing is acknowledging that it exists. And the reality is the person who would implement this is usually higher up and they are full on experiencing it themselves. So I think a training on some upper level would be really important, because you don't want people shutting that down because they don't want anyone to know they're a fraud.
Right.
And actually, the answer to this, I think you guys probably know better than I would. What would you want to have happen at your companies? What would be meaningful to you?
Right. That is a really good question, right? Because I'm sure there are things we definitely could be helped with, and especially I think for people coming into the company early on, or that are junior or are using an intern spot or something like that to help out. And I think there has to be, like, I often feel like it's very seldom you get a real just positive feedback loop, right? it's usually so often a mixed bag, right? You get your feedback loop, and it's all the good parts and all the bad parts, and you come out from that meeting and just hear the bad parts. So maybe there could be something like, okay, after a week, we just go through everything positive that happened, right? Even though it was a shitty week or whatever, right? So focus on that instead of just focusing, because I feel like a lot of company meetings, I don't know if you guys feel the same, Amanda and Fredrik, but a lot of things when we get together in a meeting and actually do a meeting is just about this shit went wrong, or this is on fire and we need to solve this problem. And it's so seldom and I think it's exacerbated by the fact that I'm not in an office, right? So I never go and have a Friday beer with the rest of the team. It's just over hangouts, and I've been trying to have our weekly meetings start with something much lighter than just the actual, work stuff. So like, did you watch the Star Wars movie or whatever, right? To make sure that we're not only focusing on whatever needs fixing. And because I think it can be very easily a super negative feedback loop where we only talk about negative things and never surface the stuff that people might need to hear.
And if you guys are partnered, you know that your relationship would be over if this is all you did, right? If you only focused on what was wrong and right. and put out fires, you'd have nothing left, right? So I think, I think that's really valuable.
Any one of you wants to add something to that, Amanda, Fredrik? You good?
Oh, I feel actually like both my consultancy company and where I work daily are kind of good at like not overstressing when things have gone wrong and actually celebrating when things are going good. So that's not a problem. Maybe it's more like everything is like flowing smoothly, like it feels like it's only me who's making a mistake. So that could be like talking more about everyone here is good, but we also do this thing, and that doesn't affect the fact that we are still good programmers or
right.
or such. That is something that I feel that might help, or maybe that would just make anything worse. But that could be a thing.
Well, and which leads to a totally different whole hour of conversation about sabotaging. If things are too good and you're the only one screwing up, sometimes people are uncomfortable when everything's going smoothly because that means things are going well, but I'm a fraud. So how does this work? And so we may end up making bad decisions to get ourselves more comfortable, which is things are chaotic. That's better for me type of. That's another hour.
Right.
Very counterproductive.
Sorry.
Another quick one here. Do you think that this is talked about way too little? Because before we started to actually discuss this in the podcast, I feel like this is something we all know is happening, but I don't think I've heard that talked about outside something we did in psychology class in school. Basically, this is seems like not a subject that is brought up that much.
I think it's probably has really high costs in an organization that does not address it. Right. I would say probably most companies, there's so much money lost in hiring and firing and sort of keeping a workforce happy and staying in place that, all of that money, I guess it gets spent in various ways, but, a few bucks on imposter syndrome might go a long way.
Right.
Because a lot of sort of psychological factors absolutely impact a work environment that aren't that difficult to alter or change or fix even. And I don't know. If you're just worried about getting the next best programmer, maybe you might miss the boat on some of that. So yes, I would assume it's under discussed and would need more attention. I think it'd be really helpful.
Right.
I mean, if the head of the entire company came to you today, Tobias, and said, "I have imposter syndrome,"
right.
what happens? Right? Does
Yeah.
it just like everyone freaks out, or what?
No. I for me at least, I would maybe humanize it a bit more. Like, it's not that I have a bad relationship to the CEO of our company, but it's also I have not a lot of interactions with him, right?
Right.
So I just have a hard time seeing him coming to me to talk about that also, right? but
you would feel so flattered and like an
Right.
imposter. Why is he talking to me?
Exactly.
I'm not good at dealing with this.
Last question before I let you go here, Wendi. Do you think there is a connection between imposter syndrome and like the feeling of burnt out and having to to burn out, basically, the classical stress syndrome there?
Absolutely. So if you are, let's talk about that 3-minute mile that Fredrik's going to run.
Mm-hmm.
So you're running and you feel good and it's your fastest time and you feel great. Well, then let's put a 30-kilo backpack on you and have you do the same thing. You're going to not go as fast and you're going to get tired quicker. And life is absolutely that way, right? Sometimes I watch little kids with their parents. It's very common in Sweden for parents to pick up their kids at 4 or 5 in the afternoon and walk home. And so I see a lot of their faces, and the kids are always just like playing and jumping in the snow and, finding bugs. And the parents look exhausted.
Right.
And they're 31 years old. And I think, okay, you weren't planning on this, were you? Like when you were a kid and you thought, I'm going to be a programmer, I'm going to be a botanist, whatever you thought you were going to do, you never knew that it was the day-to-day effort that it would take. And you never knew all the stuff none of us would ever grow up, right? And now you just take the general difficulty of that. Now you add a 30-kilo backpack of no one knows that I am really terrible and I have to hide this. I mean, think of just hiding a secret. It's exhausting and it takes away from your resources. It takes away from your sort of will and desire. And I think eventually people hit the wall. I mean, perfectionists, Superman, Superwoman, that's usually the only way that they stop is they have to hit the wall. And it's the system's way of trying to create some equilibrium again, because we're overextended. I don't know what the burnout rate is in Sweden. I do know that my little town here of Alingsås has the highest in Sweden. I don't really know why, but I sure see it on their faces. But it's a pretty common thing. And I think it's more so as we get busier and we work from home. We don't have designated, I'm done working, now I'm home, as much as it used to be. And I think it's taking a toll. And then you add this added weight of, I'm not really good enough, and you're just going to exhaust yourself.
Right. That's really good. So this is a serious problem, and if you're feeling affected of it, don't just ignore it. As I think the takeaway, right?
Yeah.
So if you don't want to ignore it, we got some tips in the program, the things you can do. But if people want to know more, do you have any good resources or things we should send people to?
That is a great question. I looked and I can't find much. I think it's not being talked about. I think you guys are onto something. Obviously getting sort of, talking to someone is really important. And if there's no one in your life that's sort of, I think that's the struggle with burnout, is that we wait until we are right next to that wall before we're like, maybe I should stop. And then, usually we have to hit the wall. So obviously I'm biased, but I think therapy is a great way to do that, is to sort of process some of those feelings, say them out loud, reveal yourself as the fraud that you are, and, have that person help you sort of rewrite the story that you've been telling yourself for probably most of your life. So that can be really valuable. I don't know what else there is.
Right.
I'm assuming there's support group somewhere. I don't know.
And I think it goes to say, at least for a Swedish audience, that psychology, like going to a therapist or whatever, is not something you have to do when you're already sick, right? It's something that is better done when when you're actually, just stressed out about something or whatever, right? So you can actually fix the problems. It's like not starting to do your exercise when you're dying from from heart disease, right? It's it's the same thing there. It's preventable cure as well, and like I can recommend it. I've gone to a therapist for a while, and it really helped me. So like if that's something that people like, seek someone out, someone you trust, and it's good.
That's awesome. I think there's one other thing there is that if you're saying to yourself, I have too much to do, I can't find the time to research and find someone, and then that is a sign that your life is so much out of control. You actually really do need one. That's a good sign. And also, like, if we just turned off our electronic devices for 5 minutes, we might have 5 minutes that we could do that. We could take a break and, this is Sweden. There's a forest 5 feet away from every one of us, right? I mean, it's around the corner. So, yeah, it's not easy to take care of yourself, especially when you're sort of raised to think otherwise, that it's your job to not do that and that you don't deserve that. And so it can be a tricky step, but I think an important one.
Right. Well, thank you so much for this discussion. I think it was really interesting and hopefully helpful for a lot of our listeners. And what if people want to know more about you don't have your own podcast, but you are appearing on a podcast every week. Can you tell people a bit more if they want to find more about Wendi Dunford?
Yes. So my brother does a podcast, and he dragged me into it years ago, and so I still do it. And that is the morning stream. That I don't know even where he keeps it. Look how good
Pants,
I am at
right?
Frog Pants. Thank you. So Google that, Frog Pants, the morning stream, and I'm on Thursdays, Therapy Thursdays. And I actually have a website, therapythursdays.com, where you can submit questions for that show and email me questions. I also see clients. If anyone's bored and needs a therapist, I'm around. And my favorite thing is I do sessions where my clients speak Swedish and I respond in English, and it's so fun because it's so much easier to talk in your own language.
Right, for sure.
So it's a fun thing. So you can find me there.
Great. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much for appearing.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Anytime. And thank you, Amanda and Fredrik, as well, for showing up for this program. And I hope you guys have a good week. And everyone listening, hope you have a good Christmas and New Year's. I don't think we might have some interview shows that we have had on in our library, in our archive that's going out during the holidays. But I don't think we'll have that many new shows after this one.
We'll see.
We'll see. You should never say never, as it is. But we'll post something every week, but it might be an archived episode or something like that. So that's what's happening. So, and the Advent of Code competition is wrapping up. We have a highly competitive top 15, I would say. And we're going to try to get the winners on a podcast in the beginning of the next year, hopefully, when it's still fresh in their minds. But yeah, check that out as well on our website, kodsnack.se. And next time, we'll probably speak Swedish again. So tune in for that. And thank you, everyone, for listening.
Have a great week and happy holidays.
Yay! Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Let me put it this way, Mr. Raymer. The 9000 series is the most reliable computer ever made. No 9000 computer has ever made a mistake or distorted information. We are all, by any practical definition of the words, foolproof and incapable of error.